I met her and the kids at Pets. They were there exploring, throwing rocks in rivers, that sort of stuff. And
oh yeah.
Yeah, so you remember this?
No, I do, yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I said, I'd made up my mind. We need to do this school. I said, and I haven't said this often, but I said, I'm going to need you to trust me on this. Do you think that you can do that? And I saw it in her face in that instant. She said, yes. And she said, in that moment, I trust you. Mm-hmm. And so she made up her mind in that instant and said, okay, so what do we need to do? I was homeschooled all the way through, kindergarten all the way through high school, never stepped a foot inside public school. I will say at the time, so it was like mid-90s was when I started my education. I think homeschooling was still kind of like a retreat from the public school more than it was like we have this new thing that we're aspiring to. It was, we just need to get out. And I have no issues with that, obviously. I think when the house is on fire, you just got to get your kids and run. I think probably the best things about it for me personally, my dad, huge reader, and he fostered that in all of us. So anything that we were interested in, books-wise, he would buy it and encourage it and encourage it and encourage it. So he fostered a love for learning, which that was one of the best things for me. The other was, I really felt like it gave me the chance to learn to think for myself, separate from my peers, separate from pressures. Essentially, I could just read, form my own opinions, and then by the time I got out into the real world, so to speak, I really felt like I was pretty well prepared and was able to kind of have my own convictions already and stick to them. Coming out of that, it was then, okay, now we're out, so now what do I need to do with our kids going forward?
As we were entering that new world for our own kids, not just wanting to retreat, but wanting to have something we were running to. So once Taylor started reading about classical education, it was the perfect fit. And once you compare everything else out there, it seems like it might be the only real option. We did so much reading, and you begin realizing that there's a whole nother world of education that we've lost. And all of a sudden it was like finding gold. It was like, this is an entire world that the entire world used to attain to, and all of a sudden we lost it. And then it was the frustration of, how did we lose it? How could we give up something that was so precious? And then just the overwhelming joy of realizing that we could try to do the same.
The Odyssey it's about the journey home. Once he gets home, there's a lot of work to do. So he goes through tons of challenges in his life. On the way home, he gets there and there's plenty of work. So he needs to build up culture. He needs to build, protect, love, and then he needs to pass that on to the next generation. That's what's left for Odysseus when he gets home. I understood my conversion as this return home to God. And then also as a veteran, just seeing that this is now the way a veteran is supposed to live, returning home to a wife, to children, to something beautiful. To me, it was just like, there it is. I benefited from being able to be in the military first, and so I went to college kind of more mature and wanting to really take my studies seriously. In our logic course, we had a textbook and it was on rhetoric. They introduce you with talking about the classical world. What is the trivium and the quadrivium? And I never heard these terms before, and it turns out it's the liberal arts. So they talk about just a brief intro on the liberal arts, and then that was my first time hearing it, and it took me down a rabbit trail because I just like, this is so new, I don't know what it is. And from that is when I first started looking into, okay, there's something now called classical Christian education, it's a movement going on, and now I was familiar with it. I saw the connection between the first one of Odyssey and then these philosophy texts, the Greeks, the Romans, and how they all connect with one another, and they're dialoguing. And it just was a conversation I wanted to be a part of, because in each of these books we're looking at what is true, good, and beautiful. What is the purpose of life? What does it mean to be human? And so they're very important questions. We have the responsibility to give our children the best that we can with the knowledge we have. Now I have this knowledge of this beautiful type of education I'm reading about. How can I get this to my kids? Maybe I'm gonna have to be involved in it. I'm gonna have to find a school or some way to give this to them. That got me thinking now, okay, we're gonna graduate soon. How am I gonna support my family? Do I take this step because there's very few classical Christian schools still, even though the movement is growing, there's still few in different areas. We want to return home to Wisconsin, what do we do? And we decided to take that step and just, okay, this is honoring God. This is something that's going to serve the church, something that's going to serve our children, and we're going to take that leap of faith and just, let's do it.
Next thing I knew, I spent the entire summer reading every book that I could find on classical education in general, but more specifically on Christian classical education. And by the end of the summer, I was just wholly convinced. It was the perfect package. You had the centrality of Christ, you have academic excellence, and you have a pursuit of teaching children to love to learn on their own. I was surprised to find that in my head, I had started separating those things, that they couldn't coexist, and then finding, well, no, not only can they coexist, but they were never meant to be separated. The thing that this reading exposed us to was the idea of looking to the future. And it's not just a couple days, it's not just even a decade or two, but you're looking generations into the future. And so the more we looked generations into the future, the more today mattered and what we did today. And so, okay, yes, we want our children to be godly people who are well educated and who are people of character. But who are they going to marry? That was a very serious question for us, and obviously we don't know the answer to that. But if we're just in our house only taking care of our kids and doing what's right for them, that's great. They come out ahead, decades in the future, to what and to who? And so it was, okay, well, that broadened the scope. It's like, okay, well, we should start thinking about that. And then that brought into, well, what about the people who can't homeschool or can't, you can name the list, like they just can't. And so more and more, as we thought about it, this multi-generational vision, so to speak, the more the scale started to tip in favor of the school.
I remember Matt stopping over one afternoon, as he usually does at our house, and the topic of school came up, and I think he was just bringing it up to see what we were thinking, or to test what we were thinking or something. And he's like, just looking at the state of public education, obviously, and in the past, you encouraged parents to homeschool, and that's been the option that has been welcome, but it's not always an option for many. And he said something along the lines, I think we're coming to a point where we need to, if we're gonna ask people to pull their kids from public education, we need to give them the option of having a Christian school to send them to which I was like, amen to that.
As these convictions were growing in our heart, unbeknownst to us, I think the Lord was doing the same in other people's hearts. So we're going, okay, this doesn't exist for us, and so we have to build it for those that have come behind us. And then we were talking about this, and we're like, okay, and we started to share it with others, and they were already thinking the same thing.
It really just kind of took off from there.
The non-negotiable for me was who's going to be the headmaster. And the reason for that is because as the head, yes, he reports to the board and the elders and those sorts of things, but he is responsible for executing. So who are we going to get? And that was going to be the major catalyst. The beautiful thing was, as we're talking about it and praying about it and just not really sure, this random guy named Nick Dellis emails the church and says, hey, I happen to be working at a classical Christian school. I'm finishing out my master's degree. I'm looking to move back into the area. My family's here. And we're like, oh, interesting. So the thing that sealed it for me with him, aside from him being an Army veteran like myself, so he's clearly very intelligent and discerning.
Clearly awesome.
Yeah. No, it was, so we did this Q&A at the church, and I felt like he embodied everything that we were hoping to produce in the school. He essentially was able to do something that at the end of your education, you're in the rhetoric phase. And essentially what that is doing, or what that's preparing you to do, is can you be persuasive? Can you take everything that you learned over the years and can you present it to somebody and be persuasive? And he was able to do all of those things. And so at the end of that, my mind was made up. It's like, we've found our guy, and from him, everything else will then flow.
There's the phrase, ora et labora, pray and work. Knowing you're going to glorify God in this, knowing something's biblically right to do, just trust in God, take that step of faith and do it.